November 1966, Las Vegas, Nevada. A billionaire arrived in the middle of the night on a private train. Howard Hughes, one of the richest men in America, was carried out on a stretcher, driven to the Desert Inn, and taken to the penthouse. The mob-connected owners weren't worried. They figured he'd be gone in a week. Instead, Hughes bought the hotel, then another, and another. Within a year, the Chicago outfit's grip on Las Vegas started to slip. Not because the FBI finally caught him. Not because the Nevada Gaming Commission shut him down. Because corporations discovered they could make more money running casinos than the mob ever did without the risk of prison. This is the story of how the Chicago outfit controlled Las Vegas for 3 decades. How they skimmed millions from casino counting rooms. How they placed their own men to run the Stardust, the Fremont, and the Desert Inn. And how Howard Hughes' shopping spree opened the door for Wall Street to buy out organized crime, changing Las Vegas from a mob playground into a corporate empire. The beginning, when the mob saw opportunity. 1931, Nevada. The state legislature voted to legalize gambling. Most people in America didn't notice. Nevada was a desert backwater, dusty towns, cowboys, and not much else. A few slot machines and gas stations, some card games and greasy diners. Nothing the mob cared about. But by the 1940s, something changed. World War II brought defense workers to Nevada. Las Vegas sat along Highway 91, the main route from Los Angeles to points east. Travelers passed by, some stopped, a few gambled. The mob started paying attention. In New York and Chicago, organized crime ran illegal gambling operations. They made millions from underground casinos, bookmaking, and numbers rackets. But it was risky. Cops could raid at any moment. Politicians demanded bribes. Competitors fought over territory. Nevada offered something different. Legal gambling. 1946, Los Angeles. Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, a mobster with ties to both New York's Luciano family and Meyer Lansky's financial empire, got orders from his bosses. Go to Las Vegas, see if there's money to be made. Siegel visited the small desert town. He saw potential. Highway 91 ran right through the city. Tourists driving to California would pass by. If you built something impressive, something glamorous, they might stop and gamble. Siegel convinced his mob partners to invest. They poured money into a new project, the Flamingo Hotel and Casino. It opened December 26, 1946, located right on Highway 91, which would later be called the Las Vegas Strip. The Flamingo was unlike anything Las Vegas had seen. Pink stucco exterior, palm trees, lush gardens, a swimming pool, entertainment, fine dining, and of course, a casino. It was the first luxury resort in Las Vegas. The opening was a disaster. Bad weather kept celebrities away. The hotel wasn't finished. Guests couldn't even stay overnight. The casino lost money. The mob partners were furious. They'd invested millions. Where were the profits? Worse, rumors spread that Siegel was skimming, stealing money before his investors got their cut. His girlfriend, Virginia Hill, was spending lavishly. Some suspected Siegel was building a fortune on the side. June 20th, 1947, Beverly Hills, California. Siegel sat in Virginia Hill's living room reading the newspaper. A gunman fired through the window with a .30 caliber carbine. Siegel died instantly, shot through the eye. Within hours, mob associates walked into the Flamingo and took over operations. The message was clear. Las Vegas was too valuable to let one man ruin it. Within a year, the Flamingo turned profitable. Very profitable. The mob had discovered a gold mine. The Chicago outfit moved in. 1948, Chicago. The Chicago outfit, the organized crime syndicate that ruled Chicago since Al Capone's days, sent the man to Las Vegas. His name was Johnny Rosselli. Born Filippo Sacco in Italy, Rosselli had been a mob enforcer in California for years. Now, the outfit gave him a new job: oversee Las Vegas operations. Rosselli started building the outfit's empire. The mob couldn't own casinos directly. Nevada gaming regulations require background checks. Anyone with a criminal record was barred from holding a gambling license. So the outfit used frontmen, people with clean records who would officially own the casinos while the real bosses stayed hidden. The system was simple. The frontman would get financing, often from the Teamsters Union pension fund controlled by mob-friendly union leaders. The casino would open. The mob would place their own people in key positions: casino managers, entertainment directors, slot supervisors. And most importantly, the mob controlled the counting rooms. By the 1950s, the Chicago outfit ran major casinos: the Stardust, the Desert Inn, the Riviera. Other crime families also moved in: Cleveland, Kansas City, Milwaukee. Even New York families had interests in Vegas casinos. But Chicago dominated. They had the best connections to the Teamsters Union pension fund, which meant access to millions in pension fund loans. They had the most muscle, and they perfected the skim. The skim was the lifeblood of Vegas mob operations. Here's how it worked. Nevada law required casinos to report all gambling revenue. The state took a percentage as tax. The federal government taxed it as income. But what if you removed cash before it was officially counted? Every night, money from the casino floor went to the counting room. Workers sorted bills, counted stacks, recorded totals for the official books. The mob placed their own people in those counting rooms. Before the official count, trusted operatives would remove cash, thousands of dollars, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars every night. The money never appeared on the books. It was never taxed, never reported. The Chicago outfit reportedly skimmed $400,000 a month from the Stardust alone. That's nearly $5 million a year in 1970s dollars, all untaxed, unreported, pure profit. Multiply that by multiple casinos over multiple years. The mob was stealing millions, and for a long time, they got away with it. The glamour era, Rat Pack, and respectability. 1960, Las Vegas. Frank Sinatra performed at the Sands. Dean Norton headlined at the Riviera. Sammy Davis Jr. drew crowds downtown. The Rat Pack made Las Vegas cool. Movie stars flew in from Hollywood. High rollers from across America came to gamble. Conventions filled hotels. The city glittered with neon signs and celebrity glamour. On the surface, Las Vegas looked legitimate. Entertainment capital of the world. Behind the scenes, the mob ran everything. The casinos had mob money. The entertainment directors had mob connections. The union workers answered to mob-controlled unions. The politicians accepted mob bribes. The FBI know they'd been investigating organized crime in Las Vegas since the 1950s. But proving the mob secretly owned casinos was hard. The frontmen had clean records. The real owners stayed hidden. And Nevada authorities weren't in a rush to crack down. Why? Because the mob-owned casinos were making money, lots of money, which meant tax revenue for Nevada, jobs for workers, growth for Las Vegas. The state preferred to look the other way as long as the casinos ran smoothly and paid their taxes on the money that was officially counted anyway. But the mob's Vegas paradise had vulnerabilities. First, the mob attracted attention. When casino owners were mobsters, even hidden ones, the press wrote exposés. Federal investigators opened files. Politicians worried about organized crime influence. Second, the mob was violent. Disputes between families led to murders. Mob enforcers drew police heat. High-profile crimes made headlines. And third, and most importantly, the mob couldn't access legitimate financing. Banks wouldn't lend to people with criminal records. Public investors wouldn't touch mob-connected businesses. That meant the mob relied on Teamsters' pension money, which was limited. Building new casinos required more capital than even the unions could provide. The mob's Vegas empire was profitable, but it had a ceiling. And then Howard Hughes arrived. The billionaire, when Hughes changed everything. Thanksgiving weekend, 1966. A private train rolled into Las Vegas at midnight. On board, Frank Sinatra, age 61, one of the richest men in the world. Hughes had been a celebrity his entire adult life. Aviation pioneer, movie producer, billionaire industrialist. He dated Hollywood actresses, broken speed records, and built one of America's largest companies. But by 1966, Hughes had become reclusive. He suffered from obsessive-compulsive disorder, drug addiction, and severe paranoia. He hadn't been seen in public for years. Hughes's aides carried him on a stretcher from the train to a van. They drove him to the Desert Inn on the Strip. They took him to the penthouse, the 9th floor, reserved for high rollers. Hughes's top aide, Robert Mayhew, had rented the entire top floor for 10 days. Hughes settled in, windows covered, curtains drawn. He sat naked in a dock, surrounded by tissue boxes, watching movies on television. 10 days passed. Hughes didn't leave. The Desert Inn's co-owner, Mo Dalitz, had a problem. New Year's Eve was approaching, the busiest gambling weekend of the year. The penthouse suites were promised to high rollers, and this eccentric billionaire wasn't leaving. Dalitz sent the message. Hughes needed to vacate immediately. Hughes's aide Mayhew panicked. Where would they move Hughes? He finally settled in. Moving him again might be impossible. Mayhew called in a favor from Teamsters Union President Jimmy Hoffa. Hoffa called Dalitz and asked him to leave my friends alone. That bought a few weeks. But by early 1967, Dalitz was done waiting. He made it clear, get out or we'll throw you out. Hughes's aide told Hughes the situation. Hughes's response was simple, buy the hotel. March 27, 1967. Hughes paid $13.2 million for the Desert Inn, $6.2 million in cash, $7 million in loans. Mo Dalitz, the mob-connected former bootlegger who'd run the Desert Inn for years, happily sold. He got to keep the land under the building and would receive $1.1 million annually in lease payments. Plus, Hughes needed Dalitz's expertise to run the casino. It was a great deal for Dalitz. He cashed out while retaining income and influence. And Hughes got what he wanted, a place to stay without being evicted. But Hughes didn't stop there. He went on a buying spree. In 1967 alone, he bought the Sands and Casino for $14.6 million, the Frontier Hotel and Casino for $23 million, the Castaways, the Silver Slipper, the Landmark. In 1968, Hughes tried to buy the Stardust, the Chicago outfit's flagship property. The U.S. Justice Department blocked the sale. Antitrust concerns. Hughes already controlled 6 major casinos on the Strip, about 1/3 of all gaming revenue in Las Vegas. If he bought another, he'd have a monopoly. Hughes stopped buying casinos, but the damage to the mob was done. Nevada had bent the rules to accommodate Hughes. Despite his refusal to be photographed, fingerprinted, or fill out financial disclosure papers, the Nevada Gaming Commission gave him licenses to operate his casinos in 1967. Why? Because Hughes brought legitimacy. Hughes was a billionaire industrialist, a defense contractor, an American hero. He wasn't connected to organized crime. If Howard Hughes was investing in Las Vegas, the city must be legitimate, not just a mob playground. Hughes's presence changed how America viewed Las Vegas and how Wall Street viewed the casino business. The law changes, opening the door to corporations. 1967, Nevada State Legislature. The same year Hughes started buying casinos, Nevada passed the Corporate Gaming Act. Before 1967, Nevada law created a problem. If a corporation wanted to own a casino, every single shareholder had to be individually licensed by the Nevada Gaming Commission. That was fine for small privately owned companies, but it made it impossible for publicly traded corporations. Imagine a hotel chain like Hilton trying to buy a Las Vegas casino. Hilton had thousands of shareholders, people who owned stock. The Gaming Commission would have to run background checks on all of them, prepare thousands of dossiers, evaluate thousands of applications. It was impossible. So legitimate corporations stayed away from Las Vegas. The only available capital came from the mob or mob-connected sources like the Teamsters Pension Fund. But in 1967, at the urging of Nevada casino operator William F. Harrah and hotel magnates Barron Hilton and Conrad Hilton, Governor Paul Laxalt pushed for change. The Corporate Gaming Act eliminated the requirement that every shareholder be licensed by the Nevada Gaming Commission. Instead, only key executives and major shareholders needed approval. This opened the floodgates. Publicly traded corporations could now own Las Vegas casinos. And the law was passed in 1967 and revised in 1969 to give Nevada even more control over corporate licensees. For the first time in Las Vegas history, legitimate Wall Street corporations could invest in casinos. And they did. The skim unravels when the FBI started watching. 1970s, Las Vegas. While corporations started moving into Vegas, the Chicago outfit was still running its biggest operation, the Stardust. 1974, Argent Corporation, a company headed by San Diego real estate developer Alan Glick, bought the Stardust and the Fremont casinos. Glick had borrowed $67.2 million from the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund. The loan was arranged by mob-connected union leaders. Glick was the front man. Clean record, no mob ties on paper. But everyone in Chicago knew the truth. The outfit controlled Argent. Frank Lefty Rosenthal ran the casinos for the mob. Rosenthal was brilliant with numbers, a professional sports handicapper from Chicago with deep mob connections. In 1974, he became executive consultant to Alan Glick. He managed the Stardust, Fremont, Hacienda, and Marina casinos. Rosenthal couldn't get a gaming license. His mob ties were too obvious. So his official title was entertainment director. But everyone knew he ran the operations. Rosenthal revolutionized Las Vegas. In 1975, he opened the first modern sports book inside a casino at the Stardust. Comfortable seating, individual TV screens, professional odds making. It was wildly successful. Other casinos copied the model. Rosenthal also hired women as blackjack dealers, another Las Vegas first. But Rosenthal's real job was overseeing the skim. He hired Jay Vandermark as slot machine supervisor. Vandermark ran the skimming operation, compromising coin weighing machines to undercount profits before official reporting. Money poured out of the Stardust counting rooms to Chicago, Kansas City, Cleveland, and Milwaukee mob bosses. The skimming scheme reportedly pulled between $7 million and $15 million from the Stardust alone during the 1970s. But the FBI was watching. 1975, federal agents received permission to wiretap Rosenthal's phones. Within days, they heard evidence of illegal betting operations. Over the following months, they documented connections between Rosenthal, Chicago mob bosses, and the skimming operation. May 1976, the Nevada Gaming Control Board launched an investigation into slot cheating at the Stardust. The investigation widened. They discovered the massive skimming operation at Argent's casinos. Jay Vandermark, the slot supervisor who'd run the skim, disappeared. He was presumed dead, murdered to keep him from talking. The Chicago outfit sent a new enforcer to protect their Las Vegas interests. His name was Anthony "Tony the Ant" Spilotro. The enforcer, when violence came to Vegas. 1971, Las Vegas. Tony Spilotro arrived from Chicago at 33. Short, 5'5", but vicious. Spilotro had grown up in Chicago's organized crime world. He'd committed burglaries, extortion, and multiple murders, though he was never convicted. The outfit gave Spilotro a job. Protect our Las Vegas operations. Make sure Rosenthal gets what he needs. Keep our interests secure. Spilotro moved to Las Vegas and opened a gift shop at Circus Casino as a front. Later, he ran the Gold Rush jewelry store, which he used to fence stolen goods. He also formed the Hole in the Wall Gang, a burglary crew that drilled through walls to rob homes and businesses across Las Vegas. Spilotro was supposed to work quietly, keep a low profile, protect the outfit's skim without drawing attention. He did the opposite. Spilotro ran his burglary ring openly. He allegedly had an affair with Rosenthal's wife, Jerry McGee. He got arrested repeatedly for burglary, fencing stolen property, and extortion. In 1981, federal authorities broke up the Hole in the Wall gang and arrested key members, including Spilotro and his brother John. Spilotro went to trial multiple times, and every time he beat the charges. Witnesses disappeared, evidence went missing, juries acquitted him. But Spilotro's visibility was a problem for the outfit. The FBI watched him constantly. His trials made headlines. Nevada Gaming Commission investigations targeted casinos connected to him. Worse, Spilotro was suspected of buying up properties in Las Vegas with skim money, enriching himself instead of sending profits back to Chicago. The Chicago outfit bosses were furious. Meanwhile, the federal heat intensified. November 5, 1981, a Kansas City grand jury returned a 17-count indictment charging 11 defendants with skimming revenues from the Tropicana casino. The indictment was part of a larger FBI operation called Strawman, targeting organized crime's control of Las Vegas casinos. In 1983, a massive federal trial began in Kansas City. The government charged top Chicago outfit bosses, including Joseph Iupa and John Cerrone, with running a skim operation. The evidence was overwhelming. Wiretaps, financial records, testimony from mob insiders who turned informant. 5 of Spilotro's underlings became government witnesses. They testified against the Chicago bosses. This was catastrophic for the outfit. Their top leaders were going to prison, and Spilotro's people were the ones who flipped. The bosses blamed Spilotro. December 4, 1983, the Nevada Gaming Commission ordered the suspension of the Stardust gaming license. Alan Glick was forced to sell Argent Corporation. The Stardust, the mob's flagship casino, was gone. In 1985, the Boyd family bought the Stardust. Clean owners, corporate structure, the Chicago outfit's control ended. But the mob had one more piece of business, Tony Spilotro. The end, buried in a cornfield. June 1986, Chicago area. Tony Spilotro and his younger brother Michael received word. The outfit bosses wanted to meet. Michael was going to be inducted, made a full member of the Chicago outfit. It was an honor. Michael wasn't yet a made man. This meant acceptance into the inner circle. Tony and Michael drove to a house in Bensenville, Illinois on June 14, 1986. They walked into the basement. A group of men tackled Michael immediately. Someone grabbed a revolver from his jacket. They put a rope around his neck. Tony realized what was happening. According to witness testimony years later, he asked, "Can I say a prayer?" There was no answer. The mob bosses beat both brothers to death. Fists, kicks, stomping, vicious, brutal violence. The brothers died from blunt trauma to the head, neck, and chest. Their lungs filled with blood. They couldn't breathe. After the murder, the bodies were stripped to their underwear and transported to a cornfield near Renos, Indiana. They were buried together in a shallow grave, about 5 feet deep, one body on top of the other. June 26, 1986, 8 days later, a farmer noticed disturbed soil near his cornfield. He thought poachers might have buried a deer killed out of season. He called the police. Investigators dug up the site. 5 feet down, they found the Spilotro brothers' bodies. The Chicago outfit had sent the message: nobody is untouchable, not even Tony the Ant. But killing Spilotro didn't save the outfit's Vegas empire. It was already too late. The corporate takeover. Wall Street discovers Vegas. 1969, Las Vegas. Kirk Kerkorian, an investor and businessman, opened the International Hotel. It cost $80 million to build, 1,500 rooms, the largest hotel in the country at the time. 2 years later, Kerkorian opened the MGM Grand, even bigger, 2,084 rooms, $106 million construction cost. To finance the MGM Grand, Kerkorian sold the International and the Flamingo to Hilton Hotels Corporation in 1970. This was the turning point. For the first time, a publicly traded corporation, Hilton, owned major Las Vegas casinos. It worked spectacularly. By 1976, 43% of Hilton's entire revenue from a hotel chain with 163 properties worldwide came from its 2 Las Vegas casinos. Wall Street noticed. Other hotel corporations moved in. Sheraton, Holiday Inn, Ramada. Harrah's went public. These corporations had advantages the mob never had. First, access to legitimate capital. Banks would lend to publicly traded companies. Stock offerings raised hundreds of millions of dollars. Corporate casinos could expand without relying on Teamsters' pension money. Second, professional management. Corporate executives with MBAs ran the casinos. They implemented modern business practices, cost controls, marketing strategies. Third, no legal risk. Corporate owners weren't facing indictment for racketeering. No FBI wiretaps, no skimming operations to protect. And fourth, public trust. Corporate ownership made Las Vegas respectable. Families felt comfortable visiting. Convention organizers booked events. The mob couldn't compete. By the mid-1970s, the Nevada Gaming Control Board started aggressively denying licenses to anyone with mob connections. Frank Rosenthal was permanently banned from Nevada casinos. Other mob-connected figures lost their licenses. Casinos with even hints of organized crime influence faced investigation. By the early 1980s, most of the mob figures were gone. Prison, banned from casinos, or dead. The Chicago outfit's Vegas empire, built over 30 years, was over. The legacy. How Vegas changed forever. 1989, Las Vegas. Steve Wynn opened the Mirage Resort. 3,000 rooms, $630 million construction cost, twice the size of the MGM Grand, financed by junk bonds from Wall Street, raising $535 million. The Mirage featured a 54-foot volcano that erupted every half hour after dark. Tropical rainforest, white tigers. It was spectacle on a scale the mob never imagined. The Mirage became Nevada's most visited attraction, more popular than even the Hoover Dam. Wynn's success triggered the 1990s Vegas boom. New mega resorts demolished the old mob-era casinos. The dunes came down, the Sands was imploded, the Stardust was demolished in 2007. In their place, themed, family-friendly corporate resorts. The Luxor, New York, the Venetian, Paris, Las Vegas. The mob-era Vegas was gone. Today, Vegas is controlled by publicly traded corporations. MGM Resorts, Caesars Entertainment, Wynn Resorts. These companies report to shareholders, file quarterly earnings, and answer to Wall Street analysts. The city generates over $70 billion in annual gaming revenue across Nevada, not just Las Vegas. The Chicago outfit's $400,000 monthly skim from the Stardust? That's pocket change compared to modern corporate profits. But the transformation came at a cost. The mob-era Vegas had character. Frank Sinatra at the Sands, mobsters rubbing shoulders with movie stars. It was dangerous, exciting, glamorous in a way that corporate Vegas never quite captured. The corporate era brought legitimacy, massive growth, and family-friendly entertainment. But it also brought corporate blandness, spreadsheets instead of style, shareholders instead of showmen. Still, there's no question which era was better for Las Vegas as a whole. The mob ran Vegas for profit. Their profit, skimmed and untaxed. Corporations run it for profit too, but legally, with billions invested in infrastructure, jobs, and economic growth. And nobody's burying bodies in Indiana cornfields. The lessons. What the Vegas takeover teaches. The Chicago outfit's loss to Vegas reveals something about how criminal organizations fail. The mob controlled Vegas for 30 years. They made millions from skimming. They had political connections. They had muscle to enforce their will. But they had fatal weaknesses. First, they couldn't scale. The mob relied on Teamsters pension money and hidden ownership. That limited how big they could build. When competition required bigger, more expensive resorts, they couldn't raise the capital. Corporate America could raise hundreds of millions on Wall Street. The mob couldn't compete. Second, they attracted too much heat. The FBI, IRS, and the Nevada Gaming Commission investigated the mob constantly. Every mob-connected casino faced scrutiny. That made legitimate business harder. Corporations faced oversight too, but not criminal investigations. That's a huge advantage. And third, they were violent. The mob settled disputes with murder. That drew headlines, police attention, and public backlash. Tony Spilatro's antics made the outfit look dangerous and unstable. Corporations settled disputes in court, much cleaner. And finally, the law changed. Once Nevada allowed corporate gaming licenses in 1967, the game was over. Legitimate business had a path into Vegas. The mob's monopoly ended. The lesson is, criminal enterprises can dominate an industry, but only until legitimate business figures out how to profit legally. Once that happens, the criminals can't compete. Legal businesses have access to capital markets, legal protection, professional management, and public trust. Criminals have none of those advantages. The mob had a 30-year head start in Vegas, but once corporations were allowed in, it took less than 20 years for organized crime to be pushed out almost entirely. There's a broader lesson, too, about Howard Hughes. Hughes didn't intend to destroy the mob's Vegas empire. He just wanted a place to live without being evicted. But his presence and his willingness to pay premium prices for mob-connected casinos changed everything. He brought legitimacy. He convinced Nevada to bend licensing rules. He proved that billionaires would invest in Vegas. That opened the door for corporate America. And once that door opened, the mob couldn't close it. Sometimes the biggest changes come from unexpected sources. Hughes was a reclusive, drug-addicted billionaire who never left his hotel room. But his Vegas buy-in spree changed the city more than any FBI investigation or gaming commission crackdown.
The Chicago outfit built an empire in Las Vegas. From 1948 to the early 1980s, they controlled major casinos, skimmed millions in untaxed profits, and ran one of the most lucrative criminal operations in American history. But they couldn't survive once legitimate business was allowed to compete. Howard Hughes' arrival in 1966 and the Corporate Gaming Act of 1967 opened Las Vegas to Wall Street. Within 20 years, corporations bought out the mob. They built bigger casinos, raised more capital, attracted more customers. Today, Las Vegas generates more gambling revenue in a single year than the Chicago outfit skimmed in 3 decades. The mob lost Vegas not because they were arrested or shut down by the government, though that happened too. They lost because corporations discovered they could make more money legally than the mob ever made illegally. And once Wall Street wants something, organized crime can't compete. That's how the Chicago outfit owned Vegas for 30 years and then lost it all to spreadsheets and shareholders. If you want to understand how criminal enterprises rise and fall, how industries transform when legal competitors enter, and how one eccentric billionaire can accidentally change an entire city, the story of Vegas is where you start. Because the Chicago outfit learned the hard way. You can control an industry with muscle and money, but you can't compete with corporations once they're allowed in. The mob had the casinos, Wall Street had the capital, and in Vegas, the capital always wins.
February 1984, Queens, New York. An FBI agent sat in an unmarked van, headphones pressed to his ears. On the other end of a wiretapped payphone, 2 men spoke in rapid-fire Sicilian dialect. They weren't discussing pizza ingredients. They were coordinating the distribution of millions of dollars worth of heroin hidden inside cans of San Marzano tomatoes. The FBI had been listening for months, and what they heard would dismantle the largest heroin operation in American history, a $1.65 billion drug empire run through neighborhood pizza shops. This is the story of the Pizza Connection. How the Bonanno family turned corner pizzerias into drug distribution centers, how they smuggled heroin from Sicily to small-town America, and how one wiretap on a Queens payphone brought the whole operation crashing down. The foundation, building a drug empire. 1974, Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. Carmine Galante walked out of prison after serving 12 years for drug trafficking. He was 64 years old. Most men his age would retire. Galante had other plans. He'd spent his time in prison thinking, planning, building connections that would reshape organized crime in America. Galante had been a Bonanno family member since the 1930s. He'd worked his way up from muscle to consigliere. He'd supervised the family's operations in Montreal during the 1950s, working the French Connection, the heroin pipeline from Turkey through France to North America. He knew the drug business better than anyone in New York. And he knew something the other bosses didn't. The French connection was dying. The DEA had smashed most of the European networks. The Corsican gangsters who'd controlled the heroin labs in Marseille were done. But Galante had a solution: Sicily. During the 1960s, before his imprisonment, Galante had started recruiting Sicilian-born mobsters to work for the Bonanno family. These weren't American wise guys. These were mafiosi from the old country, men who grew up in the Sicilian Mafia, who spoke barely any English, who moved to Brooklyn and kept their old world ways. American mobsters called them Zips, a derisive nickname for their rapid-fire Sicilian dialect that nobody else could understand. The Zips had been slowly arriving in New York throughout the 1960s and early 1970s. They settled in Bushwick, Brooklyn, particularly around Knickerbocker Avenue. They opened legitimate businesses, bakeries, cafes, and especially pizza parlors. On the surface, they looked like hard-working Italian immigrants trying to make it in America. They were building an infrastructure. When Galante got out of prison in 1974, he immediately took control of these Zip crews. The official Bonanno boss was Philip Rastelli, but Rastelli was in prison. Galante declared himself the acting boss and nobody challenged him. Why? Because Galante had the Zips. The Sicilian faction gave Galante something no other New York boss had: direct connections to Sicily, to the Sicilian Mafia, to heroin labs that could process morphine base from Turkey into pure heroin. The French connection was dead, but Galante was building something bigger: the pizza connection. Here's how it worked. In Sicily, Mafia labs in Palermo province converted morphine base from Turkish suppliers into heroin. These weren't crude operations. These were sophisticated labs producing high-purity product. The heroin was packaged into plastic bags marked with small cuts of pen marks to identify which family owned each shipment. Then came the smuggling. The heroin was hidden inside cans of San Marzano tomatoes, those big cans of Italian tomatoes every pizza place uses for sauce. The cans were shipped to pizza parlors across the United States: New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan. The pizza shops weren't just fronts, they were active businesses. Real customers came in, ordered pizza, paid cash. But in the back room, something else was happening. The tomato cans arrived, the heroin came out. Local distributors picked it up, the money flowed back. Sometimes hidden in the same pizza parlors, sometimes laundered through legitimate brokerages and banks. Galante's system was brilliant for a couple of reasons. First, pizza parlors are cash businesses. Thousands of dollars flowing through every week and nobody questions it. The IRS can't prove if you sold 100 pizzas or 200. The cash from heroin sales blended perfectly with legitimate pizza money. Second, the Zips could use pizza terminology as code on the phone. Do you have my cheese? The tomatoes arrived. I need 30 pounds of mozzarella. To anyone listening, it sounded like normal restaurant talk. But the FBI would later realize these were drug transactions. Third, Galante placed his pizza shops in small towns, not New York City, where the DEA was watching. Towns like Oregon, Illinois, Milton, Wisconsin, Paris, Illinois, Freeland, Pennsylvania. Places where a Sicilian immigrant opening a pizza place seemed perfectly normal. Places where local cops had never seen organized crime. By 1979, the operation was massive. Galante had become the most powerful drug trafficker in America. His heroin network stretched from Sicily to Canada to the American Midwest. Money poured in, millions, every month. But Galante made a fatal mistake. He got greedy.
The murder.
when power becomes a death sentence. Galanti didn't just want to run the Bonanno family's drug operation, he wanted to control all drug trafficking in New York. He started muscling in on the Gambino family's territory, the man in a piece of everyone's drug business, acting like he was untouchable. The other families watched Galanti's behavior with growing alarm. He was violating basic Mafia rules. The commission, the ruling body in New York's 5 families, was supposed to approve major decisions. Galanti ignored them. Worse, Galanti was becoming impossibly rich and powerful. His Sicilian faction answered only to him. The Zips were loyal to Galanti personally, not to the Bonanno family or the commission. If Galanti kept going, he wouldn't just be the Bonanno boss, he'd be the bosses of bosses, the most powerful mob figure in America. The commission decided he had to die. Even the official Bonanno boss, Philip Rastelli, who is still in prison, approved the hit. Galanti had taken over Rastelli's family and treated him like he didn't exist. July 12, 1979, Bushwick, Brooklyn. It was 87 degrees. Galanti, age 69, went to lunch at Joe and Mary's Italian-American restaurant on Knickerbocker Avenue. The restaurant was owned by his cousin, Giuseppe Thorano. Galanti brought his usual companions, 2 Sicilian bodyguards, Cesare Bonventre and Baldessare Amato, plus Leonard Coppola, a loyal Bonanno capo, and Thorano himself. They sat in the back patio garden eating lunch, wine and salad. Galanti had his ever-present cigar clenched in his teeth. About 3 p.m., 3 men wearing ski masks walked through the restaurant. They stepped onto the back patio. Bonventre and Amato, Galanti's bodyguards, moved aside. The gunmen opened fire with shotguns and automatic pistols at point-blank range. Galanti was hit in the left eye. The impact hurled him backward from the table onto the ground into a small tomato patch. His cigar was still in his mouth. Coppola and Thorano died instantly alongside him. The hitmen fled. Bonventre and Amato, the bodyguards who'd conveniently moved out of the way, disappeared immediately. They hadn't been touched. The message was clear. They'd betrayed their boss. Within hours, FBI surveillance photographed Bonanno soldier Anthony Bruno Indelicato being congratulated by Gambino underboss Neil Della Croce. The hit had been a joint operation, approved by the commission, carried out by Bonanno members with cooperation from other families. Galanti was dead, but his heroin empire didn't die with him. The succession, a baker takes control. After Galanti's murder, the Sicilian faction needed a new leader. Salvatore Toto Catalano stepped up. Catalano was 43 years old, born in the town of Cimina near Palermo. He'd emigrated to New York and settled in Brooklyn, living an unassuming life. He owned a bakery in Queens, Al Dente Pizza at 10315 Queens Boulevard. His brothers owned businesses nearby. Catalano lived in a modest townhouse in Middle Village. He drove nice cars, Cadillacs, a Mercedes, an Audi, but nothing ostentatious. To outsiders, he was just another successful immigrant businessman. To the FBI, he was invisible. But within the Sicilian Mafia, Catalano was a made man with impeccable credentials. His family in Sicily had deep Mafia connections. He'd been placed in America specifically to run the drug operation. After Galanti's death, Catalano briefly became the acting boss of the entire Bonanno family. It didn't last long. He couldn't communicate well enough with the American-born mobsters. His English was limited, his Sicilian dialect thick. Within a few years, leadership passed back to Rastelli. But Catalano retained control of what mattered, the drug operation. He had 2 key partners, Giuseppe Pino Ganzi, age 50, born in San Giuseppe Giotto, Sicily, a short, thick-set man who lived around the corner from Catalano's bakery in Middle Village. Ganzi was Catalano's chief lieutenant, his eyes and ears on the street. and Cesare Bonventre, who'd been one of Galante's bodyguards. Bonventre was 6'4", unusually tall for a Sicilian. At 26, he was young, ambitious, and ruthless. He and his cousin Baldo Amato ran high-stakes baccarat games at Cafe Viel on Nacabaca Avenue. These three men, Catalano, Ganci, and Bonventre, formed the core of the new operation. Under Catalano's leadership, the pizza connection expanded. More pizza shops opened across the country. More heroin shipments arrived. The connection to Sicily grew stronger. But they made one critical change. They became obsessed with security. Catalano and his crew never discussed business in their homes or businesses. They never used regular phones. Instead, they used public pay phones. There was a payphone down the street from Catalano's bakery on Queens Boulevard. Catalano spent hours there every day, making and receiving calls. Ganci did the same from payphones near his house. Bonventre and Amato had their favorite phones in Brooklyn. They rotated between multiple phones, never using the same one twice in a row. They spoke in Sicilian dialect, using code words. Shirts meant heroin. Suits meant money. Pizza terminology filled their conversations. They thought they were untouchable. They were wrong.
The investigation, when the FBI started listening. 1976, Brooklyn. A man walked into a Bonanno social club on Madison Street. His name was Donnie Brasco. He said he was a jewel thief, a burglar, looking to make connections with the mob. His real name was Joseph Pistone. He was an FBI agent. For the next 5 years, Pistone infiltrated the Bonanno family deeper than any agent had ever penetrated the Mafia. He became friends with Benjamin Lefty Ruggiero, a longtime soldier who introduced them around. During those years, Pistone heard things. He heard about the Zips, the Sicilian faction that the American mobsters didn't trust. He heard that they were the meanest killers in the business. He heard about heroin operations. One day, Lefty pointed out a man to Pistone, Salvatore Catalano. Lefty said Catalano had been granted the concession for heroin for the entire United States. Pistone passed this information to his FBI handlers. The FBI was interested. An agent named Carmine Russo had already been watching the Sicilian faction. Russo worked organized crime in New York. He'd noticed the Zips, these Sicilian immigrants who hung around together, spoke their dialect, ran their own crew. Russo suspected drug activity, but he couldn't prove it. When Pistone's intelligence came in, it confirmed Russo's suspicions. Catalano was running a major heroin operation. The FBI began surveillance. They watched Catalano's bakery. They watched Ganci's movements. They watched Bonventre and Amato at their Knickerbocker Avenue haunts. The Sicilians were cautious. They never carried drugs themselves. They never discussed business where it could be overheard. But they used those payphones. The FBI installed pen registers, devices that record which numbers are dialed from a phone. The pen registers showed something remarkable. These guys were calling all over the country: Illinois, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and frequently to numbers that trace back to other suspected drug dealers. In 1982, the FBI received official authority to investigate drug cases, concurrent jurisdiction with the DEA. The Bureau decided to focus on exactly this kind of case: large-scale drug trafficking tied to organized crime. The FBI went to federal court and got approval for wiretaps. They tapped the payphones, and suddenly they could hear everything. The conversations were in Sicilian dialect. So the FBI brought in translators. What they heard was extraordinary. Hours upon hours of coded discussions about drug shipments, money transfers, distribution networks. The men never said heroin, but the context was unmistakable. The shirts arrived. Heroin shipment. Did you get my cheese? Money payment. 30 pounds of tomatoes. 30 kilos of heroin. The FBI listened, documented, built their case. But they still couldn't connect the Sicilians directly to the drugs. Then they got lucky. February 1984, a DEA agent in Philadelphia contacted the FBI. He was working a Sicilian pizza shop owner who was dealing multi-kilo quantities of heroin. The DEA agent had made undercover buys. When the FBI checked their pen registers, they found something remarkable. That Philadelphia pizza shop owner had been calling the payphones in Queens, the same phones Catalano and Ganzi used. The connection was made. The FBI now had proof. The Sicilian pizza shop owners across the country were part of one network, and that network led back to Catalano in Queens. But Catalano wasn't the top. The FBI kept investigating. International cooperation became crucial. Italian authorities were running their own investigations into Sicilian Mafia drug trafficking. Spanish police were tracking suspicious Sicilians in Madrid. The pieces started coming together. The top man wasn't in New York at all. It was Gaetano Badalamenti, a former boss of the Sicilian Mafia, exiled from Sicily in 1978 by rival families. Badalamenti had continued running drug operations from abroad. He moved constantly: Spain, Switzerland, Brazil. His nephew, Pietro Alfano, ran operations in the Middle West from Illinois. Badalamenti supplied the heroin. Catalano distributed it in America. By early 1984, the FBI had built an overwhelming case. Thousands of hours of wiretap conversations, physical surveillance photos, financial records showing money laundering through banks and brokerages, testimony from confidential informants, international cooperation from law enforcement in a dozen countries. It was the most complex drug investigation in American history. On April 8, 1984, Spanish police arrested Gaetano Badalamenti and his nephew, Pietro Alfano, as they walked down a street in Madrid. The next day, April 9, 1984, the FBI executed coordinated raids across 6 cities. Nearly 30 arrests, 6 FBI officers working simultaneously. Among those arrested, Salvatore Catalano at his bakery in Queens, Giuseppe Ganzi at his home in Middle Village, Baldassare Amato, dozens of others, pizza shop owners in Illinois, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. The FBI seized the drug paraphernalia, large amounts of cash, weapons, and boxes of documents. The pizza connection had been smashed.
The trial, 17 months that made history. September 30th, 1985, United States District Court, Southern District of New York. 22 defendants sat in the courtroom, all Sicilian-born men. The trial was about to begin. Nobody knew it would last 17 months. The longest criminal jury trial in United States history. The prosecution team was led by Assistant U.S. Attorneys Richard Martin, Louis Freeh, who would later become FBI Director, Robert Stewart, Robert Bucknam, and Andrew McCarthy. They'd spent over a year preparing. gathering evidence from around the world. The evidence was staggering. Testimony from 300 witnesses, evidence from 55,000 wiretapped conversations, physical surveillance footage and photos, financial records, drug seizure reports. The trial transcript would eventually fill 41,000 pages. The government's case was simple. These 22 men were part of a vast conspiracy that imported $1.65 billion worth of heroin into the United States between 1975 and 1984. They'd used pizza parlors as fronts. They'd laundered money through banks and brokerages. They operated across 4 continents. The lead defendants were Gaetano Badalamenti, the former Sicilian Mafia boss, and Salvatore Catalano, his American counterpart. The trial had challenges from day one. Many defendants spoke limited English. Translators were needed constantly. The jury had to sit through hours of wiretap conversations in Sicilian dialect read from English translations. Louis Free made an innovative decision. He had actors read the wiretap transcripts aloud, performing the dialogue. It helped the jury follow the complex coded conversations. The prosecution called key witnesses. Joe Pistone, Donnie Brasco, testified about his undercover work. He explained how Lefty Ruggiero had pointed out Catalano and said he controlled heroin distribution for the entire United States. Tommaso Buscetta testified. Buscetta was a Sicilian Mafia member turned informant. He'd been captured in Brazil in 1984. He didn't have direct knowledge of the pizza connection, but he explained Mafia structure, rules, and how the Sicilian families controlled drug trafficking. Salvatore Contorno testified, another Sicilian informant. Contorno testified he'd attended a 1980 meeting in Sicily where several defendants discussed heroin. He'd seen them test heroin samples, pouring white powder onto a hot plate, checking purity. Those same samples were later seized by the DEA. The defense argued the prosecution was wrong. These were legitimate businessmen. The coded language on the phones was innocent. The evidence was circumstantial, but the evidence was overwhelming. The trial had dramatic moments. December 1st, 1985, 3 months into the trial, defendant Gaetano Mazzara was murdered in New Jersey, shot to death. Nobody was ever charged. It was likely internal mafia violence, friction between Catalano and Badalamenti's factions over money. February 11, 1987, 1 month before the verdict, defendant Pietro Alfano was shot and crippled while shopping in Greenwich Village. He survived but ended up in a wheelchair. This was retaliation for Mazzara's murder. The mafia was eating itself. 2 defendants pleaded guilty to lesser charges during the trial. On March 2, 1987, after 17 months, the jury delivered their verdicts. 18 of the remaining 19 defendants were convicted. The only acquittal, Vito Badalamenti, Gaetano's son. He'd been arrested with his father in Spain, but the evidence against him personally was weak. Everyone else, guilty. Guilty of conspiracy to import and distribute heroin, guilty of RICO violations, guilty of money laundering. The courtroom was silent as the verdicts were read. 18 guilty verdicts, one after another. June 22, 1987, Judge P.L. Laval handed down sentences. 5 defendants received 45 years in prison, the maximum. Gaetano Badalamenti, 45 years and a $125,000 fine. Because he'd been extradited from Spain with a provision of no more than 30 years, he'd be eligible for release after 30 if he lived that long. He died in prison in 2004 at age 80. Salvatore Catalano, 45 years, $1.15 million fine, and $1 million in restitution. The baker from Queens who ran the American operation. He served 25 years and was deported to Sicily in 29. He's still alive, arrested again in Sicily in 2024 for extortion at age 33. The other 13 defendants received sentences between 12 and 35 years. The pizza connection was over. The aftermath, how one case changed everything. The Pizza Connection trial accomplished something prosecutors never done before. It didn't just convict individual criminals, it destroyed an entire criminal enterprise that spanned 4 continents. The Bonanno family drug operation, built over 2 decades, generating billions, was gone overnight. But the case's impact went beyond just one trial. The Pizza Connection became a template for how to fight organized crime in the modern era. First, it proved the power of international cooperation. The FBI worked with police in Italy, Spain, Switzerland, Turkey, Brazil, Canada, and a half dozen other countries. Evidence gathered in Sicily was used in New York courtrooms. Arrests in Madrid triggered raids in Queens. This was 1984, before email, before the internet. International coordination required telephone calls, fax machines, translators, and trust between agencies that never worked together before. The success led directly to the expansion of the FBI's legal attaché program. Today, the FBI has offices in embassies around the world. The Pizza Connection proved why that was necessary. Second, it validated the use of RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, against drug trafficking organizations. RICO had been passed in 1970, originally to target the Mafia. The Pizza Connection showed how RICO could be applied to international drug conspiracies, targeting the organization rather than just individual dealers. Third, it demonstrated the effectiveness of wiretaps in complex cases. The 55,000 wiretapped conversations provided a roadmap of the entire operation. Every call, every code word, every instruction. The Pizza Connection investigation became FBI case study material, a model for how to build transnational organized crime cases. And it worked. In the years after the Pizza Connection trial, the FBI used the same techniques against other organized crime groups. The Commission case in 1985 took down the bosses of New York's 5 families. The case against John Gotti in the early 1990s used similar wiretapped evidence. The techniques pioneered in the Pizza Connection became standard practice. But the most important impact was this. The Pizza Connection shattered the myth of Mafia invincibility. For decades, the Mafia had operated with near impunity. They controlled politicians, bribed cops, intimidated witnesses. They built criminal empires worth billions. The Pizza Connection proved they could be taken down. Not by chance, not by luck, by methodical investigation, by international cooperation, by patience and perseverance. The FBI agents who worked the case, Carmine Russo, Charles Rooney, and dozens of others, spent 4 years building it, sitting in surveillance vans, listening to wiretaps, translating Sicilian dialect, following money trails through Swiss banks. When it finally went to trial, the evidence was so overwhelming that 18 of 19 defendants were convicted. The message to organized crime was clear. Your codes don't work. Your payphones aren't safe. Your international connections won't protect you. If you're trafficking drugs on this scale, we will find you. We will build a case. We will put you in prison for decades. The lessons. What the Pizza Connection teaches about power. The Pizza Connection story reveals something about how organized crime organizations rise and fall.
Carmine Galante built a brilliant drug empire. He saw that the French connection was dying and pivoted to Sicily. He recruited Sicilian mafiosi who could operate in both worlds. He used pizza parlors as fronts. Genius, because they're cash businesses in every American town. But Galante made a fatal error. He got too greedy. He couldn't be satisfied running the most profitable drug operation in America. He had to challenge the Gambino family. He had to ignore the commission. He had to act like he was untouchable. That arrogance got him killed. Salvatore Catalano learned from Galante's mistake. When Catalano took over, he kept a lower profile. He lived modestly. He didn't challenge other families. He focused solely on the drug business. But Catalano made a different mistake. He thought technology would protect them. The payphones, the code words, the Sicilian dialect. Catalano believed these precautions made him invisible. He was wrong. The FBI simply adapted. They tapped the payphones. They hired translators. They listened for months, documenting every transaction. No system is foolproof if your adversary has the resources and determination to break it. The pizza connection also shows how modern law enforcement evolved. In the 1970s, the FBI fought organized crime family by family, city by city. They arrested individual members, but couldn't touch the larger organization. The pizza connection required a different approach. International cooperation, wiretaps, financial investigations, RICO charges, multi-year investigations that followed the money and drugs across continents. It took 4 years to build the case, 4 years of surveillance and wiretaps before the arrests. But when they finally moved, they didn't just arrest drug dealers. They destroyed the entire network. That's the lesson. Complex criminal organizations require complex investigations. You can't just arrest the street dealer and expect the organization to fall apart. You have to map the entire network, identify the leaders, prove the conspiracy, take them all down at once. The pizza connection did exactly that. And finally, there's a lesson about globalization. The pizza connection existed because of globalization. Turkish morphine base, Sicilian heroin labs, American distribution networks, Swiss bank accounts. Galante and Badalamenti built a true multinational corporation, except their product was heroin. To fight it, law enforcement had to become global too. The FBI couldn't just work in New York. They needed partners in Rome, Madrid, Zurich, and Istanbul. That international cooperation, pioneered in the pizza connection case, became the blueprint for fighting 21st century organized crime. Today's transnational criminal networks, drug cartels, human traffickers, cyber criminals, all require the same approach. Build relationships, share intelligence, coordinate across borders. The pizza connection proved it could be done. The pizza connection stands as one of the most significant organized crime cases in American history. It dismantled a $1.65 billion drug empire that had operated for nearly a decade. It resulted in 18 convictions after the longest criminal trial in U.S. history. It established the investigative techniques still used today to fight transnational organized crime. And it proved something prosecutors had long hoped. Even the most sophisticated criminal organizations can be beaten. You just need a wiretap, patience, and international cooperation. If you want to understand how modern organized crime investigations work, how the FBI takes down international drug cartels, money laundering operations, and criminal networks, study the pizza connection. Because everything law enforcement does today to fight transnational crime started with one FBI agent, a wiretap payphone on Queens Boulevard, and two Sicilian gangsters who thought their code words would keep them safe. They were wrong. And that one wiretap changed everything.
March 13th, 1987, Brooklyn Federal Courthouse. The jury foreman stood up. After deliberations, they had reached a verdict. John Gotti, the boss of the Gambino crime family, stood accused of racketeering, murder, illegal gambling, and loan sharking. The charges carried decades in prison. The foreman read the verdict. Not guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Gotti supporters cheered. Law enforcement sat in stunned silence. John Gotti walked out of the courthouse a free man again. The media called him the Teflon Don. No charges stuck. 3 major trials, 3 acquittals. What nobody knew at the time was that Gotti had paid $60,000 to bribe juror number 11. And what Gotti didn't know was that the FBI was building a case he couldn't beat. A case so powerful that no bribe, no intimidation, no jury tampering could save him. They called it RICO, and it would give John Gotti life in prison without parole. The rise from street gang to mob boss. John Joseph Gotti Jr. was born October 27, 1940, in the Bronx, New York. He grew up poor, one of 13 children. His father struggled to provide for the family. By age 12, Gotti had joined a street gang. By age 14, he'd been arrested for the first time, caught trying to steal a cement mixer. He talked his way out of trouble, claimed it was just a boyhood prank. That charm, that ability to negotiate his way out of trouble would serve him for decades. Gotti dropped out of school in 8th grade. The streets became his education. In 1966, Gotti was hijacking trucks at JFK Airport for the Gambino crime family. In 1968, he was arrested for his role in stealing thousands of dollars worth of merchandise. He was sentenced to prison. Released in 1972, he immediately returned to crime. Within 2 years, he was arrested again, this time for murder. Same pattern, he went to prison, served a few years, got out. By the late 1970s, Gotti had become a made man in the Gambino family, a full member, someone who had proven himself through violence and loyalty. His stocks in trade: gambling, loan sharking, and narcotics trafficking. The murder, December 16, 1985. By 1985, Gotti had grown dissatisfied with Paul Castellano, the boss of the Gambino family. Castellano was too isolated, too businesslike. He lived in a mansion on Staten Island, far from the streets. More importantly, Castellano had banned drug dealing. Anyone caught dealing drugs would be killed. Gotti's crew was making millions from drugs. Castellano's ban threatened everything. In August 1983, Gotti's brother Gene and his associate Angelo Ruggiero were arrested for heroin trafficking. Castellano demanded the wiretap transcripts. He wanted to see what the FBI had. When Ruggiero refused to hand them over, Castellano threatened to demote Gotti. So Gotti decided to move first. On December 16, 1985, at 5:30 p.m., Paul Castellano and his bodyguard, Thomas Bellotti, arrived at Sparks Steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan for dinner. 4 gunmen in trench coats and Russian fur hats approached. They opened fire. Castellano was shot multiple times. He fell to the pavement. The image, the Dapper Don.
John Gotti was unlike any mob boss before him. Most bosses avoided attention. They dressed plainly. They stayed out of the media. Gotti did the opposite. He wore $2,000 custom suits. He held lavish parties. He walked into restaurants like a celebrity. The media loved him. They gave him nicknames, the Dapper Don for his expensive clothes. Later, the Teflon Don, when charges kept failing to stick. Gotti courted this attention. He played to the cameras. He gave quotes. He smiled for photographers. The public started seeing him as a folk hero, a charismatic outsider who beat the system. FBI Director Jules Bonavolante said something that captures the problem perfectly. With all this media coverage, he's beginning to look like a folk hero. What the public should realize is that he's the boss of the largest Cosa Nostra family, that he surrounds himself with ruthless killers, and that he is flat out a criminal. But the public didn't care. They loved Gotti, and Gotti loved the attention. The first acquittal, 1986 to 1987. In 1986, federal prosecutors indicted Gotti under RICO on charges of racketeering, murder, loan sharking, illegal gambling, and truck hijacking. It was a solid case. The evidence was strong. But Gotti had a strategy: jury tampering. During jury selection, a man named George Pape was impaneled as juror number 11. What the court didn't know was that Pape was a close friend and business associate of Bosco Radonjic, the boss of the Westies, an Irish mob. Through Radonjic, Pape contacted Sammy Gravano and agreed to sell his vote for $60,000. Pape received 3 payments of $20,000 each during the trial. When jury deliberations began, most juries wanted to convict Gotti, but Pape held out. He refused to vote guilty, and he did something more dangerous. He made the other juries afraid of their own safety. They worried that if they convicted Gotti, the mob would come after them. On March 13, 1987, after days of deliberation, the jury acquitted Gotti and his co-defendants on all charges. It was a stunning upset, a major victory for organized crime, a humiliating loss for federal prosecutors, and it made Gotti more famous than ever. 5 years later, in 1992, George Pape was convicted of obstruction of justice for his role in the fix. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison, but by then, the damage was done. The pattern: 3 acquittals. Between 1986 and 1990, John Gotti was tried 3 times. He was acquitted every time. In 1987, the RICO case, where George Pape fixed the jury. In 1990, an assault case, where Gotti was accused of ordering an attack on a union official. He was acquitted on February 9, 1990. After the verdict, there were firework displays in the streets by his supporters. Each acquittal reinforced Gotti's image, the Teflon Don, untouchable. But federal prosecutors knew what was happening. They suspected jury tampering. They suspected witness intimidation. The problem was proving it, and the FBI was determined to find a way. The strategy: RICO. RICO stands for Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It was passed in 1970 specifically to fight organized crime. The law works like this. If prosecutors can prove someone committed 2 or more felonies as part of a criminal enterprise, they can charge that person with racketeering. And racketeering carries massive sentences, life in prison. More importantly, RICO allows prosecutors to charge mob bosses for crimes they ordered even if they didn't personally commit them. Before RICO, prosecutors had to prove a mob boss personally murdered someone. That was almost impossible. Bosses never did their own killing. But with RICO, if prosecutors could prove the boss ordered the murder, that was enough. By the late 1980s, federal prosecutors had successfully used RICO to convict the bosses of multiple crime families in the Mafia commission trial. Now, they were ready to use it against John Gotti.
The surveillance. Bugs in the Ravenite Social Club. In January 1988, Gotti made a critical mistake. Against Sammy Gravano's advice, Gotti required all his captains to meet with him at the Ravenite Social Club every Wednesday night. Gotti wanted to show his power. He wanted his men to publicly demonstrate their loyalty. But this decision allowed FBI surveillance to photograph and identify nearly the entire Gambino family hierarchy. The FBI already had bugs planted in the Ravenite, but the audio quality was poor. Espresso machines, soda machines, background noise made it impossible to hear conversations clearly. Then, over Thanksgiving weekend, 1989, the FBI made their breakthrough. They broke into the apartment of Nettie Sorelli, who lived on the 3rd floor of the building. They planted a listening device in her apartment. Gotti had been using that apartment for his most sensitive conversations, away from the noise of the social club, away from the street. For the next 13 months, the FBI recorded over 600 hours of conversations, and what they heard was devastating. Gotti discussed murders he'd ordered, specific people, specific reasons. He talked about Paul Castellano's murder, Tommy Bellotti's murder, Robert DiBernardo's murder, Liborio Melito's murder, Louis DiBano's murder. In December 1989, Gotti was recorded discussing Louis DiBano, a Gambino soldier who had failed to show up to a meeting. Gotti told his consigliere, Frank Locascio, "You know why he's dying? He's gonna die because he refused to come in when I called. He didn't do nothing else wrong." The FBI had Gotti's own voice on tape ordering a murder. The break, when Sammy Gravano heard himself. Salvatore, Sammy the Bull, Gravano was Gotti's underboss, his most trusted lieutenant. Gravano had been with Gotti for years. He had participated in murders. He had helped Gotti become boss. But in December 1990, after Gotti was arrested, something happened that changed everything. Gotti told Gravano not to listen to the apartment tapes. That terrified Gravano. If Gotti didn't want him to hear the tapes, that could only mean one thing. Gotti had said something negative about Gravano on those recordings. Gotti was probably setting up Gravano's murder, making it seem justified to the other capos. When the FBI offered to let Gravano listen to portions of the tapes, Gravano immediately agreed. What he heard confirmed his worst fears. Gotti was making bitter, insulting comments about him, disparaging remarks, comments that showed Gotti was laying the groundwork to have Gravano killed. On November 13, 1991, Sammy Gravano agreed to turn state evidence. He would testify against John Gotti in court. This was shocking. An underboss of a major crime family testifying against his boss? But Gravano believed he was a dead man anyway. Better to cooperate and survive in witness protection than die on Gotti's orders. The trial, 1992. Jury selection for Gotti's RICO trial began in January 1992. Because of Gotti's reputation for jury tampering, extraordinary precautions were taken. The jury was anonymous. Their identities were protected. For the first time in a Brooklyn federal case, the jury was fully sequestered during the trial. They were isolated, watched, protected. No contact with the outside world. No chance for Gotti to get to them. The trial began on February 12, 1992. Prosecutors Andrew Maloney and John Gleason opened by playing the apartment tapes.
The jury heard Gotti's voice discussing murders, talking about Castellano, confirming his motive to kill his boss. Then on March 2nd, Sammy Gravano took the stand. For 9 days, Gravano testified. He described the structure of the Gambino family. He explained how Gotti became boss. He detailed the conspiracy to murder Castellano. He gave a complete account of the hit and the aftermath. Gravano's testimony was devastating, but it might not have been enough on its own. He was a criminal, a killer. The defense could attack his credibility. But the tapes corroborated everything Gravano said. Gotti's own voice proved Gravano was telling the truth.
The verdict, April 2nd, 1992. After a 6-week trial, the jury deliberated for just 13 hours. On April 2nd, 1992, they returned with a verdict, guilty, on all 13 counts. Racketeering, 5 murders, conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, illegal gambling, loan sharking, tax evasion. Frank Locascio was convicted on all charges except 1 count of illegal gambling. The head of the FBI's office in New York famously remarked, "The Don is covered with Velcro, and every charge stuck." On June 23, 1992, Judge I. Leo Glasser sentenced both men to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Outside the courthouse, Gotti's supporters rioted. They fought with police, they overturned cars. 7 protesters were arrested on felony riot charges. But it didn't matter. John Gotti, the Teflon Don, the Dapper Don, the boss of the Gambino family, was going to federal prison for the rest of his life. The prison. Life in solitary. Gotti was sent to the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, a maximum security prison. He spent 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. No contact with other prisoners, no phone calls, no visitors except lawyers and family. The government wasn't taking chances. They wanted to make sure Gotti couldn't run the family from prison. In 1998, Gotti was diagnosed with throat cancer. It was treated, but it returned. On June 10, 2002, John Gotti died in a federal prison hospital in Springfield, Missouri. He was 61 years old. He had spent the last 10 years of his life in prison, sick, isolated, forgotten by the media that once adored him. The irony, the attention that destroyed him. John Gotti loved attention. He courted the media. He played to the cameras. He wanted to be famous. And that attention destroyed him. Other mob bosses stayed in the shadows. They avoided publicity. They lived quietly. Those bosses lasted longer. But Gotti couldn't resist the spotlight. And that spotlight brought FBI scrutiny, it brought media pressure, it brought public expectations for his prosecution. The FBI director said it perfectly. With all this media coverage, he's beginning to look like a folk hero. That couldn't be allowed to stand. So the FBI poured resources into taking Gotti down. They planted bugs, they flipped witnesses, they built the case. And Gotti's own arrogance helped him. Requiring his captains to meet every Wednesday at the Ravenite, that allowed the FBI to photograph the entire hierarchy. Using Nettie Sorelli's apartment for sensitive conversations, the FBI bugged it. Talking openly on those tapes about murders he'd ordered, that gave prosecutors everything they needed. Gotti thought he was untouchable. He thought he owned the judges. He thought he could beat any case. But Rico proved him wrong. The legacy, the last of the Dapper Dons. John Gotti's conviction marked a turning point in organized crime. He was the last mob boss to achieve celebrity status. After him, the bosses went back to the shadows. His son, John Gotti Jr., tried to take over the family, but he faced trial after trial. Eventually, he was convicted and served time. The Gambino family never recovered from Gotti's downfall. By the 2000s, it was a shadow of what it had been. RICO had proven its effectiveness, not just against Gotti, but against organized crime in general. Today, the Italian-American Mafia still exists, but it's nothing like it was in Gotti's era. And that's largely because RICO gave prosecutors the tools to dismantle entire criminal enterprises, one boss at a time.
May 23, 1963. The Oregon Diner, South Philadelphia. A small man, 5'5", walked into the crowded restaurant. Someone was sitting in his booth. The man asked politely for the booth. The person sitting there refused. An argument started. The small man grabbed the butter knife from the table. He stabbed the 24-year-old longshoreman to death. His name was Nicodemo Little Nicky Scarfo, and this single act of violence over a booth would eventually destroy 50 years of mob control in Atlantic City. The foundation, when Nucky built an empire. To understand how Atlantic City became a mob stronghold, you need to go back to 1920, the year Prohibition started. Enoch Nucky Johnson was Atlantic County Treasurer, a Republican political boss, the son of a former sheriff. When the Volstead Act made alcohol illegal across America, Johnson saw an opportunity. Atlantic City's location was perfect, a coastal resort town between New York and Philadelphia. Ships could anchor offshore and transfer illegal liquor to smaller boats. Johnson made a decision. Prohibition would not be enforced in Atlantic City. Hotels openly served drinks. Nightclubs flourished. Casinos operated without interference. Tourists flocked to the city. They called it the world's playground. Johnson took a percentage of everything. Every gallon of illegal liquor sold. Every gambling operation. Every brothel. His income reached $500,000 per year, equivalent to about $8.5 million today. He alloyed himself with major mob figures: Arnold Rothstein from New York, Charlie Luciano, Johnny Thorio, Benny Siegel, Meyer Lansky. In May 1929, Nucky hosted the Atlantic City Conference. Crime bosses from across the country gathered at the Ritz-Carlton and Ambassador hotels. Al Capone attended, Bugs Moran, Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello. They discussed territory disputes, how to end violent bootleg wars, how to organize crime nationally. Some historians believe this conference created the foundation for the National Crime Syndicate, and Nucky Johnson was at the center of it all. For 20 years, from 1920 to 1941, Nucky Johnson controlled Atlantic City completely. The police answered to him. The politicians answered to him. The mob answered to him. Then in 1941, federal prosecutors convicted Johnson of tax evasion. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. But even with Johnson gone, the machine continued. The transition, when the machine survived without Nucky. After Johnson's conviction, New Jersey Senator Frank Hap Farley took control of the political organization. Farley served in the New Jersey legislature for a record 34 years, from 1941 to 1971. He was the longest-serving boss of Johnson's organization. Under Farley, the mob's control continued. The gambling, the corruption, the payoffs. Atlantic City remained the place where vice thrived openly. But by the 1960s, things were changing. Atlantic City's economy was declining. The glory days at the boardwalk were fading. The city needed something to revive itself. In 1971, the political machine was finally broken. Dr. Joseph McGann defeated Farley in an election. For the first time in 50 years, Atlantic City's government was no longer controlled by the Johnson-Farley political machine. But that didn't mean the mob was gone. They were just waiting for the next opportunity. The opportunity: 1976 casino gambling. In 1976, New Jersey legalized casino gambling in Atlantic City. The goal was economic revitalization, jobs, tourism, tax revenue. What actually happened was an explosion of mob activity. Construction companies, labor unions, service industries, everything needed to build and operate casinos. And the Philadelphia mob was perfectly positioned to take advantage. The Philadelphia mob family, also known as the Bruno family, controlled South Jersey. Their boss was Angelo Bruno, known as the Docile Don, because he preferred negotiation over violence. He ruled for 2 decades, from 1959 to 1980. It was a period of peace and prosperity. Bruno banished violent members to Atlantic City. One of them was Nicodemo Scarfo. Remember the man who stabbed someone over a booth in 1963? That was Scarfo. After killing the longshoreman, Scarfo pled guilty to manslaughter. He served about 10 months in prison. When he returned to Philadelphia, Angelo Bruno was furious. The murder had drawn too much attention. Bruno didn't tolerate reckless violence. As punishment, Bruno banished Scarfo to Atlantic City. At the time, in 1964, Atlantic City was a backwater, past its glory days, economically depressed. Scarfo was essentially being exiled to nowhere. But then, 12 years later, casino gambling was legalized. Suddenly, Atlantic City wasn't a backwater anymore. It was a gold mine. And Nicodemo Scarfo was already there.
The rise, when Scarfo became a power. Scarfo spent the 1960s and 1970s building connections in Atlantic City. He ran gambling operations, he made connections with local unions, he positioned himself. When casinos started being built in the late 1970s, Scarfo's concrete company, Scarf Inc., got contracts. Developers needed concrete. Scarfo provided it at inflated prices. With union cooperation, he controlled. He intimidated construction companies into buying from him. Money started pouring in. Then, in 1980, everything changed. On March 21, 1980, Angelo Bruno was shot and killed outside his home in South Philadelphia. Bruno had been boss for 21 years. His murder was ordered by his consigliere, Antonio Campanigro. Campanigro thought he would become the new boss. He was wrong. The Mafia Commission had not approved Bruno's murder. Killing a boss without permission was a violation of the most fundamental rule. In April 1980,
Campanegro was found dead. His body was in the trunk of a car in the Bronx. He had been tortured, shot multiple times. $300 in bills was stuffed in his mouth and anus, a message about his greed. Philip, Chicken Man Testa, became the new boss of the Philadelphia family. Testa chose Scarfo as his consigliere. For less than a year, Testa ran the family. Then, on March 15, 1981, a nail bomb exploded under Testa's front porch. Testa was killed instantly. The murder was orchestrated by Frank Chicky Narducci and Peter Casella, another power grab. Scarfo saw his opportunity. He approached the Genovese family. He had a close relationship with Genovese consigliere Louis Bobby Manna. Scarfo told them his suspicions. Narducci and Casella killed Testa to take over the family. The Genovese family set up a meeting. Casella confessed. Narducci was killed. Casella was banished to Florida. That left Nicodemo Scarfo as the clear candidate for boss. In 1981, at age 52, Scarfo became boss of the Philadelphia crime family, and he immediately changed everything. The brutality, a new kind of violence. Angelo Bruno ruled through peace, through negotiation, through cooperation with other families. Scarfo ruled through terror. From 1981 to 1989, Scarfo's reign was marked by constant, brutal violence. He murdered rivals. He murdered associates. He murdered anyone who showed the slightest hint at disloyalty. On December 16, 1978, before he even became boss, Scarfo and his associate, Nicholas, Nick the Blade, Virgilio, murdered a judge, Judge Edwin Helfant, an Atlantic County Municipal Court judge. Why? Because Helfant refused to cooperate with them. Virgilio was facing murder charges. Scarfo offered Helfant $12,500 to give Virgilio a lighter sentence. Helfant refused. So, Scarfo and Virgilio shot him to death. This was the kind of man Scarfo was. He murdered a judge over a bribe refusal. When Scarfo became boss in 1981, the violence escalated. He promoted his nephew, Philip Crazy Phil Leonetti, the underboss, in 1986. He demoted the old captains. He replaced them with younger, more violent men. This angered the old guard. Men who had been well positioned under Bruno suddenly found themselves passed over. It also angered South Jersey mobsters, who were furious that Scarfo was allowing New York crime families to operate in Atlantic City. Despite Atlantic City being Philadelphia family territory, Scarfo gave the commission and New York families permission to operate there. Why? Because he needed their support to maintain his position as boss. But this created resentment, internal conflict, anger. And Scarfo's response to any opposition was always the same: murder. The Christmas murder, when flash and glitter came to Philly. On December 16, 1980, just before Christmas, something happened that exemplified Scarfo's new style. John McCullough, boss of the Philadelphia Roofers Union, was in the kitchen of his house in Bustleton. There was a knock at the door. A man stood there holding a poinsettia, a Christmas delivery man. McCullough opened the door. The man pulled out a gun and shot McCullough to death. Law enforcement later learned why McCullough was killed. He had tried to take control of part of the Atlantic City Bartenders Union from Scarfo. That was it, a union dispute. And Scarfo had him murdered on Christmas with a poinsettia. This was Scarfo's style: public executions, flash, glitter, terror.
Testing Scarfo brought blazing guns and violence to the Philadelphia mob. Bruno had operated quietly. Scarfo operated loudly. And the violence continued for years. The Rico-Bean War, when the old guard fought back. Harry the Hunchback Rico Bean was a well-respected, long-time Philadelphia crime family member. He had been a made man for decades. He was in his 70s by the early 1980s. Rico Bean didn't like Scarfo. He didn't like the violence. He didn't like being passed over for promotion. So, Rico Bean started a war. From 1982 to 1984, the Rico Bean faction fought Scarfo's faction. Scarfo's men hunted Rico Bean's crew. Rico Bean's men retaliated. Murders happened constantly, on the streets, in restaurants, in homes. Eventually, Scarfo's superior numbers and ruthlessness won. Rico Bean was arrested and convicted. His crew was decimated, but the violence had drawn enormous attention from law enforcement. The FBI was watching, federal prosecutors were building cases, and inside Scarfo's own organization, people were starting to break.
The informants, when fear turned to cooperation. Nicholas Nicky Crow Caramandi was a Scarfo enforcer, a hitman, someone who carried out murders on Scarfo's orders. But Caramandi started to believe that Scarfo was going to kill him. Scarfo was paranoid, egotistical. He saw threats everywhere. In 1986, Caramandi was indicted for his role in an extortion case. He made a decision: cooperate with the government or die. Caramandi became an informant. He testified against Scarfo and the entire organization. His testimony was devastating. He described murders, extortions, the structure of the family. Then, in 1989, something even more shocking happened. Philip, the crazy Phil Leonetti, Scarfo's nephew and underboss, flipped. Leonetti had been Scarfo's most trusted associate, his family, his right hand. But Leonetti was facing life in prison after a RICO conviction. He decided to cooperate. Leonetti's testimony destroyed what was left of the family. He knew everything. He had participated in everything. He was Scarfo's nephew, and he told prosecutors all of it. The convictions, 1988 to 1989. Between 1987 and 1989, Nicodemo Scarfo was convicted 3 times. In 1987, he was convicted of conspiracy to commit extortion. He received a 14-year sentence. In November '88, he and 16 associates were convicted under RICO: racketeering, murder, extortion, loan sharking, gambling, and drug dealing. The jury found Scarfo guilty of ordering 9 murders and 4 attempted murders. His victims included Judge Edwin Helfand, an Atlantic City concrete contractor, a Philadelphia drug dealer, several mob associates, and the son of one of his oldest mentors. Federal prosecutors called Scarfo a remorseless and profoundly evil man. In May 1989, he was sentenced to 55 years in federal prison. 2 weeks earlier, he had been sentenced to life in prison for the 1985 murder of bookmaker Frankie Flowers. Those convictions were later overturned. Scarfo and 7 others won a new trial and were acquitted. But the 55-year RICO sentence stuck. Nicodemo Scarfo would spend the rest of his life in prison. The family destruction, when Scarfo's son was shot. On October 31st, 1989, Scarfo's middle son, Nicodemo Scarfo Jr., was dining at Dante and Luigi's restaurant in South Philadelphia. It was Halloween night. The restaurant was crowded. A masked man walked in and shot Nicodemo Jr. multiple times. He survived,
But the message was clear. Even Scarfo's own family wasn't safe. His oldest son, Christopher, had already changed his name legally. He wanted nothing to do with his father's business. His youngest son, Mark, had been taunted for years by classmates about his father's criminal activities. On November 1st, 1988, during his father's trial, 17-year-old Mark Scarfo attempted suicide. He hung himself in his father's concrete supply company office in Atlantic City. Mark didn't die immediately. He fell into a coma. He remained in that coma for almost 25 years before dying in 2014. A father's violence had destroyed his own son's life.
The aftermath, what was left? By 1990, the Philadelphia crime family was shattered. Scarfo was in prison for life. His underboss had flipped. His top enforcers had become informants. Over 20 people had been murdered during Scarfo's reign. Atlantic City, which had been controlled by the mob for 50 years, was finally free. Not because law enforcement had gotten smarter, not because new laws had been passed, but because Nicodemo Scarfo's brutality destroyed the family from the inside. He had murdered so many people, created so much fear, that his own organization turned against him. The informants weren't motivated by justice. They were motivated by survival. They believed Scarfo would kill them, so they killed him first, legally, through testimony. The union control, how the mob lost Atlantic City. 2 successive presidents of Local 54, the Hotel and Restaurant Workers Union in Atlantic City, were forced to step down because of their ties to Scarfo. In 1990, following a civil racketeering suit by the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Jersey, a federal monitor was appointed to run Local 54. The goal? Rid it of mob control. The mob's grip on Atlantic City's labor unions was broken. Scarfo's concrete company lost its contracts. The extortion rackets ended. The casinos, under federal oversight, could no longer be infiltrated by organized crime. Atlantic City, for the first time since 1920, was not controlled by the mob. The irony, the man Bruno exiled. Angelo Bruno had banished Scarfo to Atlantic City in 1964 as punishment. Scarfo was too violent, too reckless, too dangerous. Bruno wanted him out of Philadelphia. But by sending Scarfo to Atlantic City, Bruno accidentally positioned him perfectly. When casino gambling was legalized, he was already there. When Bruno was murdered, Scarfo was in the right place to take power. And when Scarfo became boss, he destroyed everything Bruno had built. Bruno's 21 years of peace and prosperity were replaced by Scarfo's 9 years of violence and chaos. The irony is perfect. The man Bruno exiled eventually destroyed Bruno's entire legacy. The expert opinion, it never recovered. George Anastasia, a Philadelphia Inquirer reporter who covered the mob for decades, wrote extensively about Scarfo. In his book, Blood and Honor, Anastasia describes Scarfo as a greedy, ruthless despot who reveled in wanton, ruthless, and senseless violence. The Philadelphia Daily News called him the undersized Atlantic City man with the oversized temper. After Scarfo's death in prison in 2017, Anastasia said something that perfectly summarized Scarfo's impact. His management style decimated the organization. It never recovered from the violence of the 1980s period. That's the legacy of Nicodemo Scarfo. He didn't just go to prison, he destroyed the entire Philadelphia crime family, a family that had existed since the 1920s, that survived Prohibition, the Depression, World War II, multiple wars with rival families. Scarfo destroyed it in less than a decade.
The comparison, Bruno versus Scarfo. Bruno ruled from 1959 to 1980, 21 years. During his reign, the family was stable, profitable, peaceful. Bruno avoided violence. He negotiated with other families. he kept law enforcement attention minimal. His nickname was the Docile Don because of his preference for peace over conflict. Scarfo ruled from 1981 to 1989, 8 years. During his reign, the family was chaotic, violent, self-destructive. Scarfo embraced violence. He murdered rivals constantly. He drew massive law enforcement attention. His nickname was Little Nicky because of his short stature, but there was nothing small about his violence. The contrast couldn't be more stark. Bruno's approach kept the family strong for 2 decades. Scarfo's approach destroyed the family in less than 1 decade. The question, why did Scarfo rule this way? The interesting question is, why was Scarfo so violent? He wasn't stupid. He knew that violence drew law enforcement attention. He knew that murdering people would eventually lead to informants. So why did he do it? Multiple sources describe Scarfo as paranoid and egotistical. He saw threats everywhere. He trusted no one, and he believed everyone was plotting against him. And his response to perceived threats was always murder. He once said, while watching his soldiers tie up the body of an associate he'd ordered killed, "I love this. I love it." He enjoyed the violence. He reveled in it. That's not strategy. That's psychology. Scarfo was a man who enjoyed killing, who used violence not just as a tool, but as an expression of power. And that mentality destroyed everything he touched. The final act, death in prison. Nicodemo Scarfo spent the last 28 years of his life in federal prison. He was serving a 55-year sentence. He would never see freedom again. On January 13, 2017, Scarfo died at a federal medical center in North Carolina. He was 87 years old. No cause of death was officially released, but multiple sources reported it was cancer. His death barely made headlines. The man who had terrorized Philadelphia and Atlantic City for years died quietly, forgotten. His 3 sons had diverged paths. Christopher changed his name to distance himself from the family. Nicodemo Jr. was serving 30 years for racketeering and fraud. Mark had died in 1988 after spending 25 years in a coma from his 1988 suicide attempt. His nephew, Philip Leonetti, was in the Federal Witness Protection Program after testifying against him. Leonetti later wrote a book, Mafia Prince, Inside America's Most Violent Crime Family and the Bloody Fall of La Cosa Nostra. The family Scarfo ruled was gone, destroyed, never to recover. The lesson? When violence destroys what it's meant to protect. Organized crime in America was built on a principle. Violence should serve the organization, not destroy it. You use violence strategically to eliminate threats, to maintain discipline, to protect territory. But you don't use violence recklessly. You don't murder people indiscriminately. You don't create chaos. Scarfo violated this principle completely. He used violence not to protect the organization, but to satisfy his own paranoia and ego. And in doing so, he destroyed the very thing he was supposed to lead. The Philadelphia crime family had survived for 60 years before Scarfo became boss. It lasted less than 10 years under his leadership. That's the lesson. Violence without purpose is just destruction. And destruction eventually consumes everything.
The legacy, Atlantic City today. Today, Atlantic City's casinos operate under strict regulatory oversight. the New Jersey Casino Control Commission, established in 1977, monitors every aspect of casino operations: background checks, financial audits, continuous surveillance. The mob can't infiltrate the casinos the way they once did. Atlantic City is no longer the world's playground where vice operates openly. It's a legitimate gaming destination, regulated, monitored, controlled. The 50 years of mob control, from Nucky Johnson in 1920 to Nicodemo Scarfo in the 1980s, are over. Not because the mob decided to leave, but because one man's brutality made the organization unsustainable. Scarfo didn't just lose control of Atlantic City, he destroyed the organization that controlled it. That's his legacy.
1985, Greenwich Village, Manhattan. An old man shuffled down Sullivan Street in a bathrobe. He wore pajamas underneath, slippers on his feet, sometimes a floppy cap on his head. He muttered to himself. He urinated in public. He played cards in storefronts. Neighbors thought he was harmless, a mentally ill old man who needed help. The FBI knew different. That man in the bathrobe was Vincent the Chin Gigante, and he was the most powerful mob boss in America. He controlled nearly 300 made men. He made over $100 million for the Genovese family. He ran operations from Miami to Philadelphia to New York. And for 30 years, he avoided prosecution by pretending to be insane. The setup, when the act began. Vincent Louis Gigante was born March 29, 1928, in Manhattan. He grew up in Greenwich Village, an Italian neighborhood, working-class families, street gangs. As a teenager, Gigante became a professional boxer. He fought 25 matches between 1944 and 1947. He wasn't great, but boxing introduced him to the mob. Boxing was a mob-controlled sport. By the late 1940s, Gigante had abandoned boxing for organized crime. He became an enforcer for Vito Genovese, a hitman, someone who killed people for money. In 1957, Gigante was given an assignment that would define his career. He was ordered to kill Frank Costello, the boss of the Luciano crime family. On May 2, 1957, Gigante walked into the lobby of Costello's apartment building. He pulled out a gun. He fired at Costello's head from close range. The bullet grazed his skull. Costello survived. Gigante had failed. Costello, wounded but alive, refused to identify his attacker. He said he didn't see who shot him. But everyone knew. The FBI knew, the mob knew, Gigante had botched the hit. In 1959, Gigante was convicted of heroin trafficking. He was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. He served 5 years and paroled in 1964. When he returned to the streets, something had changed about Vincent Gigante. He started acting strange. The act, the beginning of the rules. In 1969, Vincent Gigante began showing signs of mental illness. He started visiting St. Vincent's Hospital in Westchester County for psychiatric treatment. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia, paranoid type. His family said he had been mentally disabled since the late 1960s. They claimed his IQ was between 69 and 72, below normal. He started wandering the streets of Greenwich Village in a bathrobe, mumbling to himself, acting confused. To the outside world, Vincent Gigante appeared to be a harmless, mentally ill old man. But inside the Genovese family, everyone knew the truth. It was an act, and it was brilliant. The strategy, pretending to be incompetent. Gigante understood something that other mob bosses didn't. If you want to avoid prosecution, you need to make law enforcement think you're not worth prosecuting. If they think you're mentally incompetent, they can't bring you to trial. So Gigante committed to the act completely. He walked around Greenwich Village in a bathrobe every day, rain or shine. He muttered on street corners. He urinated in public. He played pinochle in storefronts with neighborhood old-timers. He checked himself into psychiatric hospitals 22 times over the years. Each time, doctors would evaluate him and confirm Vincent Gigante is mentally ill. To the outside world, it looked legitimate. But inside the family, everyone knew it was an act. One associate was caught on tape in the late 1970s saying that Gigante told him he had put a lot of time into his crazy act. Another mobster was recorded in 1985 saying that if Gigante got arrested, all the finagling and manipulating to fool the government and all them years he spent in that asylum would have been for nothing. The FBI knew he was faking, but they couldn't prove it. The power, running the family from the shadows. In 1981, Gigante became the boss of the Genovese family. But he didn't announce it. He didn't take credit for it. He didn't show his power publicly. Instead, he appointed Anthony Fat Tony Solano as the front boss. To the outside world, Solano was the boss. Law enforcement believed it. The media believed it. Even other mob families believed it. But inside the Genovese family, everyone knew the truth. Gigante was the real boss. He ran the family from the shadows. He gave orders. He made decisions. He controlled everything. And he did it all while pretending to be mentally incompetent to stand trial. The operations, a $100 million empire. Under Gigante's leadership, the Genovese family became the most powerful organized crime family in America. They controlled labor unions, teamsters, carpenters, laborers' unions. Any construction project in New York had to deal with Genovese-controlled unions. The waterfront, the docks, the fish market on the East River. They ran bookmaking operations, loan sharking rings, illegal gambling. They extorted garbage companies, shipping companies, trucking companies, construction firms. At the Javits Center, a massive convention center in Manhattan, Genovese-controlled unions demanded payoffs from every company that wanted labor peace. Gigante's family made over $100 million per year at its height, and Gigante controlled it all while wandering Greenwich Village in a bathrobe.
The genius, how he avoided surveillance. Gigante didn't just fake mental illness. He was also the most careful mob boss in history. He knew the FBI was listening, so he almost never spoke on the phone. When he did use the phone, he would whistle into the receiver to disrupt any recordings. He spoke softly, barely above a whisper, making it hard for bugs to pick up his voice. He never left his home unoccupied. He knew FBI agents would break in and plant listening devices. Members of the Genovese family were not allowed to mention Gigante's name in conversations or on phone calls. When they had to refer to him, they pointed to their chins or they made the letter C with their fingers. That's where his nickname came from, the chin. The FBI bugged meeting places. They recorded thousands of hours of conversations, but they rarely caught Gigante saying anything incriminating. The exposure, when the front boss fell. In 1987, Fat Tony Solano was convicted in the Mafia commission trial. Solano had been presented as the boss of the Genovese family. He was sentenced to 100 years in prison. Shortly after the conviction, something unexpected happened. Vincent, the fish Cafaro, Solano's right-hand man, became an informant. Cafaro told the FBI the truth. Solano had been a front boss. The real boss was Vincent Gigante.
and the Genovese family had been keeping up this ruse since 1969. The FBI finally had confirmation of what they had suspected for years. Vincent Gigante was the real boss, and he had been running the family while pretending to be insane. The indictment, 1990. In 1990, the federal government indicted Vincent Gigante for racketeering. But there was a problem. Gigante's lawyers argued that he was mentally incompetent to stand trial. They presented psychiatric evaluations. Doctors testified that Gigante was schizophrenic, that he couldn't understand the charges against him, that he couldn't assist in his own defense. The case stalled. For 7 years, the federal government tried to bring Gigante to trial. For 7 years, his lawyers argued he was too mentally ill. Federal judges ordered psychiatric evaluations. Multiple doctors examined them. Some said he was competent, others said he wasn't. The case became a legal nightmare. The break. Cookie D'Urso. In the mid-1990s, the FBI finally got the break they needed. A Genovese family associate named Michael Cookie D'Urso agreed to cooperate. D'Urso went undercover. He wore a wire. He recorded thousands of hours of conversations with Genovese family members. The recordings revealed the truth about how the family operated. More importantly, they revealed that Gigante was sharp, competent, in control. Family members discussed Gigante's orders. They talked about his decisions. They referred to him as the boss. The recordings made it clear Gigante was not mentally incompetent. He was running a sophisticated criminal empire. The admission, 2003. In 1997, after 7 years of legal battles, Gigante was finally brought to trial. He was convicted of racketeering and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. But even in prison, Gigante continued the act. He walked around the prison yard in his bathrobe. He muttered to himself. Then, in 2003, something extraordinary happened. The federal government filed new charges against Gigante for ordering murders and other crimes. This time, Gigante's lawyers couldn't save him. On April 7, 2003, Vincent Gigante stood in federal court and admitted the truth. He admitted that he had been faking mental illness for decades. He admitted that the Bathrobe Act was a performance, a strategy to avoid prosecution. In open court, in front of federal prosecutors and FBI agents, Vincent Gigante confessed. The crazy act was fake, all of it. The end. December 19, 2005. Vincent Gigante died in federal prison on December 19, 2005. He was 77 years old. He had spent the last years of his life in prison, finally forced to admit what the FBI had known all along. He wasn't crazy. He was brilliant.
The legacy, the greatest con in Mafia history. The Vincent Gigante case remains the single most brilliant criminal defense strategy in organized crime history. For 30 years, Gigante successfully avoided prosecution by pretending to be mentally incompetent. He ran the most powerful crime family in America while wearing a bathrobe and mumbling on street corners. He made over $100 million for his organization while federal agents watched him urinate in public. The act was so convincing that it took the federal government decades to bring him down. Even after he was indicted, it took 7 more years to get him into a courtroom. The question, was it worth it? Gigante spent 30 years pretending to be insane. That's 3 decades of walking around in a bathrobe, 3 decades of playing the fool in public, 3 decades of pretending to be something he wasn't. Was it worth it? From a purely strategic perspective, yes. Gigante ran the Genovese family for over 20 years without serious legal trouble. Other mob bosses during the same era were arrested, convicted, and imprisoned much earlier. John Gotti was arrested and convicted in the early 1990s. The bosses of other families fell one by one during the Mafia commission trials. But Gigante lasted longer than all of them. His crazy act bought him decades of freedom and power. The irony, the boss who hated attention. What makes Gigante's story even more interesting is that he despised attention. He hated John Gotti's high role and lifestyle. He hated that Gotti courted media attention. He hated that Gotti wore expensive suits and showed off. Gigante believed that a real mob boss should be invisible. So Gigante made himself invisible by becoming a spectacle. By wandering around in a bathrobe, he became so ridiculous that nobody took him seriously. And that was exactly the point.
February 14th, 1929, Chicago. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre. 7 men lined up against a garage wall, executed by machine gun fire. Everyone knew who ordered it: Al Capone, the most powerful gangster in America. The police knew, the FBI knew, the newspapers knew, but nobody could prove it. Capone had murdered rivals. He ran bootlegging operations. He controlled prostitution rings. He bribed judges and police officers. Yet he walked free. Then the IRS decided to try something different. They didn't go after him for murder. They went after him for taxes. And in 1931, the most powerful gangster in America was destroyed by unpaid taxes on income he claimed he never made. The rise from Brooklyn to Chicago. Alphonse Gabriel Capone was born January 17, 1899, in Brooklyn, New York. He was the son of Italian immigrants. His father was a barber. His mother was a seamstress. Capone dropped out of school after 6th grade. He was 14 years old. He joined a street gang. He earned his nickname Scarface after being sliced across the cheek during a fight. By 1920, Capone had moved to Chicago to work for crime boss Johnny Torrio. Torrio ran gambling operations, prostitution, and bootlegging. When Prohibition started in 1920, illegal alcohol became the most profitable business in America. Capone helped Torrio build an empire. In 1925, Torrio was nearly killed in an assassination attempt. He retired. Capone, at age 25, took over the entire operation. The empire, $100 million in revenue. By the late 1920s, Al Capone controlled Chicago's underworld completely. His organization, known as the Chicago Outfit, ran bootlegging operations, bringing illegal alcohol from Canada and overseas, gambling houses across Chicago and its suburbs, prostitution rings with hundreds of workers, protection rackets that extorted money from legitimate businesses. At its peak, Al Capone's empire generated an estimated $100 million per year in revenue. That's equivalent to about $1.8 billion today. Capone lived like a king. He owned a mansion in Miami. He wore custom suits. He drove specially built armored cars. He spent $200 to $250 per week on meat alone in Miami. His phone bill in 1929 was over $3,000. He paid $40,000 for his estate at Palm Island, Florida.
Then he spent another $100,000 on improvements, including a $4,000 swimming pool. He gave $58,000 to a police and widows fund in 1925. He sent $15,600 to his church in 1926. Everything was documented. Everything was visible, except his income tax returns, because Al Capone never filed taxes. The problem: untouchable by traditional law enforcement. The Chicago police couldn't touch Capone. He had bribed half the force. The FBI wanted him badly, but they needed a federal crime to prosecute. Murder wasn't a federal crime in the 1920s. Bootlegging was hard to prove. Gambling was local. Federal agent Elliot Ness led a team called the Untouchables because they couldn't be bribed. Ness routinely raided Capone's operations. He destroyed breweries. He confiscated trucks. But it wasn't enough to convict Capone. Witnesses refused to testify. They were either bribed or threatened. Evidence disappeared. Police reports vanished. Capone seemed untouchable. Then someone at the Treasury Department had an idea. The strategy: follow the money. Assistant Attorney General Mabel Walker Willebrandt came up with a tactic that changed law enforcement forever. Instead of trying to prove specific crimes, why not just prove that wealthy criminals had income they didn't pay taxes on? If someone is living a luxurious lifestyle, driving expensive cars, wearing expensive clothes, they must have income. And if they have income, they must pay taxes on it. Even illegal income is taxable. The IRS assigned Special Agent Frank Wilson to investigate Capone's finances. Wilson started in October 1928. He spent 3 years meticulously tracing every dollar Capone spent. He documented Capone's expenses, the suits, the cars, the mansion, the parties. He tracked down receipts. He interviewed merchants. He found bank records. He built the financial profile of a man making enormous amounts of money. But Capone had been careful. He never put assets in his own name. He used proxies. He moved money through shell companies. Wilson couldn't find direct proof of Capone's income. Then Capone made a mistake. The mistake: the lawyer's letter. In 1930, Capone's brother Ralph was convicted of tax evasion. Capone saw what happened to his brother and got scared. He ordered his lawyer to regularize his tax position, to work out a deal with the IRS. The lawyer, a man named Lawrence Mattingly, wrote a letter to the IRS. In the letter, Mattingly admitted that Capone had made $100,000 in income in 1928 and 1929. The lawyer was trying to negotiate a payment plan. He was trying to avoid prosecution. But by admitting Capone had income, the lawyer gave the IRS exactly what they needed: proof that Capone made money, proof that Capone owed taxes, proof from Capone's own lawyer. The indictment, March 13, 1931. On March 13, 1931, a secret grand jury indicted Capone for income tax evasion. The charges covered tax years 1924 through 1929. The government claimed Capone had evaded $215,000 in taxes on a total income of over $1 million during that 5-year period. Capone was arrested and released on bail. He tried to negotiate a plea deal. He offered to plead guilty in exchange for a light sentence. On June 16, 1931, Capone appeared in court and pled guilty. He told reporters he had struck a deal for a 2.5-year sentence. But the presiding judge, James Herbert Wilkerson, had other plans. Judge Wilkerson told Capone directly, "I am not bound by any deal." The judge refused to accept the plea bargain. Capone immediately changed his plea to not guilty. The case would go to trial. The trial, October 1931. The trial began in October 1931. Capone's defense team had been relying on the plea bargain. They had hours to prepare for trial. Their strategy was weak. They claimed all of Capone's income was lost to gambling. The prosecution destroyed this defense easily. First, gambling losses can only be subtracted from gambling winnings, not from other income. Second, Capone's expenses far exceeded what his claimed income could support. The prosecution presented evidence of Capone's spending: the suits, the mansion, the parties, the cars. They showed that Capone lived like a man making hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, yet he claimed to have no income. The jury heard testimony about Capone's lifestyle. They saw receipts. They heard from merchants. Then Capone tried one last trick. He attempted to bribe the jury. Judge Wilkerson found out about it. At the last minute, he quietly swapped the entire jury panel with a different group. Capone's bribe money was wasted on people who would never sit in the jury box. The verdict, October 17, 1931. On October 17, 1931, after weeks of trial, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty. The jury convicted Capone on 5 counts of tax evasion, 3 felonies, and 2 misdemeanors. They found them not guilty on 17 other counts, but the 5 guilty verdicts were enough. On October 24, 1931, Judge Wilkerson sentenced Capone: 11 years in federal prison, a $50,000 fine, $7,692 in court costs, and $215,000 plus interest in back taxes. At the time, it was the harshest sentence ever delivered for tax fraud. Capone was 32 years old. The prison, from Atlanta to Alcatraz. Capone began serving his sentence at the U.S. Penitentiary in Atlanta in May 1932, but accusations quickly arose that he was receiving special treatment, that he was manipulating the system, that he still had power even inside prison. So in 1934, Capone was transferred to Alcatraz Island, the maximum security prison in San Francisco Bay. Alcatraz was designed to hold the most dangerous criminals in America, and it was designed to be escape-proof. Capone was now truly isolated. He had no access to his empire, no way to communicate with his organization, no ability to run his operations. His health began to deteriorate. Capone had contracted syphilis years earlier. He never properly treated it. By the mid-1930s, the disease was affecting his brain. He developed neurosyphilis. His mental capacity declined. He became confused, disoriented, weak. Prison doctors diagnosed him with the mental capacity of a 12-year-old child by the end of his sentence. The release, November 1939. On November 16, 1939, Al Capone was released from prison. He had served 7 years, 6 months, and 15 days. He had paid all fines and all back taxes, but he was a broken man. He was 40 years old, but his mind was gone, his body was weak, his empire had collapsed while he was in prison. Capone never publicly returned to Chicago. Instead, he retired to his mansion in Palm Island, Florida. He lived there with his wife and family, essentially a recluse. He couldn't function normally. He couldn't manage basic tasks. His mental decline was complete. On January 25, 1947, Al Capone died of cardiac arrest after suffering a stroke. He was 48 years old. The irony, destroyed by taxes, not violence. Al Capone killed people. He ordered murders. He orchestrated the St. Valentine's Day massacre, but he was never convicted of murder. He ran bootlegging operations worth millions, but he was never convicted of violating the National Prohibition Act. He bribed judges and police officers, but he was never convicted of corruption. The thing that destroyed Al Capone wasn't his violence. It was paperwork. He didn't file his taxes. The most powerful gangster in America, the man who controlled Chicago's underworld, the man who murdered rivals without consequence, was brought down by the IRS. The legacy, how tax enforcement changed. The conviction of Al Capone changed law enforcement forever. Before Capone, tax evasion was seen as a minor crime, a civil matter, something you settled with the IRS quietly. After Capone, tax evasion became a weapon. The government realized that if they couldn't convict criminals for their actual crimes, they could convict them for not paying taxes on their criminal income. Other gangsters fell to tax prosecutions after Capone. Waxy Gordon, a bootlegger, was convicted of tax evasion after rival mobsters tipped off authorities. Meyer Lansky, the mob's accountant, spent decades creating elaborate money laundering schemes specifically to avoid what happened to Capone. Every major organized crime figure after 1931 understood the lesson: file your taxes or die in prison. The question, could Capone have avoided? The interesting question is, could Capone have avoided prosecution if he just filed taxes? The answer is probably yes. If Capone had filed tax returns claiming income from investments or business operations, he could have paid taxes on his earnings. He would have had to pay a lot, but he had a lot of money. The IRS wouldn't have cared where the money came from. They just wanted their cut. By refusing to file any tax returns at all, Capone made himself an easy target. His lifestyle was visible. His expenses were documented. His wealth was obvious. All the IRS had to do was prove he had income and didn't pay taxes on it. If he had filed returns and paid taxes, the prosecution would have been much harder.
The lesson? The system always gets its cut. Al Capone thought he was above the law. He bribed cops, he intimidated witnesses, he killed rivals. He controlled an entire city through violence and corruption. But he couldn't escape the IRS, because the IRS doesn't care about violence. They don't care about corruption. They don't care about murder. They care about one thing. Did you pay your taxes? Capone didn't, and it destroyed him. The lesson is simple. You can break every law. You can commit every crime. You can build an empire on violence. But if you don't pay your taxes, the government will find you, and they will destroy you. Not with bullets, not with violence, with paperwork.